Practice 3, after we completed lesson 3, we had a look at using TK-Prof and how to do turn on tracing and set up tracing within the environment. In this practice, we're going to show you how to create a service, because we talked about using services as a way to collect information for a particular application. And the database has 3 services that it broadcasts by default. One is its global name of the database. The second one is a service that represents all the background processes, and a service that represents all the server processes that are serving individual users as either dedicated servers or shared servers on the database. So that leaves us a group of shared services we can add. And over time we've added, originally when we first added services to the database, you were allowed to have 63, and we used 3, so you could create 60 of your own. In 11G release 2, we happened to make it 115, and in 12C, we made it over 1,000, so you can have lots of services now. But still don't make them too fine-grained. Maybe have 2 or 3 services per application, not 1 per module type, okay? We also want you to see how to trace your application using the services. That's why we create the service. And interpret the trace information by using trace session and TK-Prof. So there is a little bit of setup to collect the trace files and to put them into the TK-Prof output format. And then the interesting part is interpreting them. So we need to look at the practice guide to do that. So I had moved down to practice 3, and I had zoomed out a bit so you could see the whole page. We'll zoom in a bit because it just makes it a little easier for me to read it as I'm working with them. And we'll move down to the next page. Basically summarizes what we saw at the end of the chapter. And now we're going to move into the tracing the application. So we give you a little overview, and then we give you a number of tasks to do as the actual part of the practice. So this is just giving you an idea what we're doing in this first phase. In this practice, you will define a service and use it to generate trace files. You then interpret the generated trace files. You can find all the scripts needed for this practice in the Oracle Home, which is /home/Oracle. And if you happen to want to copy it from here, please note they missed out a leading slash in the PDF file. You'd have to add it, or you can't paste this directory. So under the labs directory, under the Oracle account, you'll find the solutions, and we're going to move to the application tracing directory. Note, there is uppercase and lowercase in the subdirectory name, and it is case sensitive on Linux. So you have to type it in correctly, so watch the uppercases. So what we want you to do first is to set it up is to turn on the set up the Oracle SID and the Oracle Home appropriately for this and set up the path. So we're going to call .aura environment systune. Okay, then we're going to move to the directory, and then they want you to have a look at the first script file called AT for application tuning _setup, a little script file to set up the environment. And we're going to run this little SQL file after we have a look at it. So first thing we should do the setup for this before we go too far and I switch pages. So we're going to do these at the operating system. We've been playing around with SQL Developer. I'm going to leave it up. I'm just going to shrink it to the desktop. And we need a terminal session. So on our desktop, there's an icon for terminals. We can double click on it. We need to do the .aura env. Okay, set it to systune. I created a new one, so I'll have to reset it. If I used an older one, it may have still had it set, but make sure it is set appropriately. If not, the commands you want to use don't work. A little example of that is I fire it up and just type in SQL+. Okay, and it actually works, so they have the basic environment variable set. I was actually surprised. But if I try to log in, We know there is a HR account out there. It will tell me the shared realm doesn't exist. That's because it's pointing to an ORCL database, and that's not the one we want. When we actually set it properly, we just hit return to get rid of those, or Control D to get out of it. Then we can type SQL plus, and we could connect to HR if we want, and it will get in. But that's not what we wanted to do. The next thing we need to do is go to the labs directory. It's a subdirectory. We logged in. We're in the Oracle home. And it's a subdirectory under here, the labs directory, CD labs. Look under there, we have the ones we showed you earlier on in practice 2. But in practice 1, we just showed them in the little file viewer. CD to demo, backup, CD to solutions. And if you're like me, you don't like typing that much. Apparently I can't type today. You can type part of the word and then hit tab and it will fill the rest in for you, which is kind of nice. Under here we have a whole group of them for different practices. We want to go to the application tracing. So just print enough to make it unique, and you can hit the tab and it will fill it in. Just makes it easier if you do it yourself. And then if we ls in here, we have a group of files in here to work with. Okay. So under the application, did I grab the right one? Application tracing, that's where we should be. Okay, we want to find the AT script file under the application tracing directory, and it should look like this when we have a look at it. And they just wanted you to see what they were doing. They're dropping a user called trace. They're recreating the user, giving them some privileges. They're making him a DBA. Dropping a table space we'll use for him. Drop a second table space, one called trace table space, one called trace 3 table space. Recreating the table spaces. Connecting with the trace user, purging the sales table. Drop the sales table from this account. Since we just created it, it shouldn't be in there, but just to make it all repeatable. Drop a few other tables we play with in this practice. Okay, and then we've set this up on these databases. Okay, if not, we'll have to run it. So the next thing we want you to do is to go have a look at this particular little shush file that we created. And what this shush file will do is update the tnsnames.ora file in the tnsnames directory by adding this alias. This file just has this alias. So we can cd to the directory and execute it. If you want to have a look at it, to just confirm it's got in this, so you can certainly look at it. And then we're going to check after we run this, that updates the tnsname file that I have. So what I like to do is before we run it, so I'm in this directory now, I like to print it out first. Oh, we'll go back to my terminal session. I'm in the solutions directory. I thought I had moved to the application trace. I could have swore I had. There we go. ls there, there's a bunch of files in there. And what we want to do, this goes in and just lists the tnsname file. Since we're going to change it, I always thought it was a good idea to have a look at it before we change it. Let's go grab it. Oh, and that's why that was the extra session that I hadn't set up. So let's go back to this one. That's where it was. And let's go in and cat it. I think I put it in the paste buffer. Cat it before we change it. Sometimes it's helpful to make this a little larger to make it easier to read. I just created it and I forgot to do it. And make it a little bigger, even more is helpful. And listen it, and it will show you there is the one that is for our database. It has a network service name, alias of systtune, that connects to a database service name of systtune. Remember I said we keep them the same? There is also a second one out there called EM-REP, that stands for EM Repository. We have Cloud Control installed, and this is a separate database called EM Repository that uses its database name, its service name, as its network alias name to get to that. And we're going to use the Cloud Control as part of this practice coming up, but we're not going to work with this database directory. We use it indirectly through Cloud Control and that. So now that we know what's in it initially, let's go add the new service name for our service. Okay, so we'll go and execute this. I just cut and paste it. You have to be a little careful when you cut and paste. If you cut and paste like I do, it just makes things a little faster. Doesn't show you what you're going to do, but it's good that we already looked at the tnsnames.or file. Now we can look at it again. We see the original two network service aliases. We have a new one called trace service. And it's going to connect to a service of trace service within the database that we're going to set up. Okay, so the next thing we want to do, they're assuming they're logging in again, setting up the SQL trace, going to the trace directory. We've added it, so they showed it, then printed out. We already did this. We're just confirming we got the thing in. Then we're going to go in and add the trace service. We're going to do this with SQL Plus, and we have an add trace service script file that we're going to add. And they show you what it does when they run it. They add the service name, a trace to the database. Okay, they're selecting to see what service names they have right now. They have one that represents the database global name systune. They also have one for the database names with XDB for the XMLDB option it's configured, and one that represents all the user processes, and one that represents the background. User processes are anything that aren't a background, either dedicated server or shared servers. And then we're going to add it, and then we're going to check what services we have out there. Okay. Once we do that, we're going to start the trace file. And then we're going to execute a group of things. Before we do that, we're going to go in and add the, set up the cloud control. So let's back up and do some of these steps. Okay, so that was them having a look at theirs. The next thing we need to do is go in and run the script file from SQL Plus. So they logged in with sysdba. So we can go ahead and do that in our terminal session. SQL Plus / as sysdba to get authenticated at the operating system level as a DBA user. Okay, we get into the database. Now we need to execute the script file. Do they tell us somewhere where I can cut and paste it? There we go, run this, and then the file name. I'll just put that in the paste buffer so we don't have to do too much typing. Paste it in, and then go ahead and execute it. Okay, so now it's gone in and checked the original service names we had, added one, and showed us that we actually have the new service name available. The next thing we want to do after we've added the trace service, we want to go in and start the trace service with this command. Okay. Takes it a few moments to do that, to add it, but now it's added the service, started the service up for us. So tells us completed successfully, and we do the show parameters service name, and it shows us the service name has the systune still, but we started the extra service against it. That's what they expected. Now they're just disconnecting from SQL Plus, and we're going to launch Enterprise Manager. So let's get out of SQL Plus the way they suggest. Then we're going to launch Enterprise Manager. We want to enter this URL in the browser. If you are running Acrobat Reader in the classroom, you can actually click on it and say allow, and it will actually launch Firefox for you. Okay. Once in a while we have a problem on these setups that sometimes it doesn't come up the way we expect. This time this is really what we expect. The Oracle Enterprise Manager is using a self-signed certificate, and browsers don't trust self-signed certificates out of the box. It's got to be a well-known certificate authority that the browser is configured to recognize, and they not. So it will either let you get out of here, but what we really want to do is say we understand the risks or we won't be able to use Enterprise Manager. So pick on I understand the risks, add an exception, okay, make the exception a permanent. So next time if I log out of Firefox, shut it down and then get back in, it doesn't ask me, and confirm the exception. Then what it will do is give you the login box, and they're just walking you through adding the exception. Okay. You can get the certificate if you want. In the new version of the browsers, you don't have to get it. In some of the older versions, you had to get it before you can confirm it. This particular version, we've upgraded to recently, you didn't have to do that. Okay. Then add the exception, so I had already done that. And then it should ask us about the licensing agreement. It will also ask us about if we want any additional tools will help with reading on the screen, and we usually pass on that. So let's go back to the browser and see where it is. It's asking me to log in. It went right to the login screen, so we didn't have to accept that. Somewhere along the way it had already been done. Okay, well then we needed to log, I guess after we log in, so we need to log in. We're going to use a Sysman account. That's a super user on the Oracle Enterprise Manager Cloud Control. And his password is the same that we had for Sys. It's actually the same for system on our databases. So Oracle_4U. And the reason why it's a little more complex is the new password constraints on 11G and beyond require uppercase, lowercase, a numeric value, and a special character like an underscore. And this happened to meet all of them and still made it reasonably easy to remember. Okay. So we're going to fill that in the browser. Sysman Oracle_4U, making sure the U is uppercase. Connect. It will tell me, do you want to accept the licenses? Sure, let's go for it. Accept the licenses. Give it a moment. Sometimes they move their browser. And then it will show you a group of pages that you could potentially pick any of them as your default page. And what they want to do is select the databases as the default page, just so we can go back to it next time we use it without having to go through a complex menu. So it makes it a little easier to make this full screen. There are a number of them. Any of them are acceptable as a full page. If you want to see what it looked like, you can preview it. What we want you to do is select as my home page. And it will bring you to the home page. And then we want to logically go in and find our database. And it complains about this plugin. Okay, and we're just going to ignore it because it should work. And that's a new complaint. Okay, we'll see if we have problems. If not, I may have to look at upgrading the plugin. So we want to pick the search list. And when you get in the browser, it isn't the default. So you click on the search list, and it will go in and note there's the Systune database. We had it set up for that. The database is up. And then what we want you to do is just click on it. Anything that is underlined in Enterprise Manager is a clickable link. We just want to click on it and drill under it. When you hover over it, it becomes a click. This is just telling us it's up, some information about it. Pretty quiet right now. It's only using 0.05% of the CPUs. And it takes it a bit because it's going in and running Enterprise, and to a great extent, I'm the first one for this copy of Enterprise Manager actually going in and looking at it, okay, for the first time. Now we want you to do a little bit of setup in Enterprise Manager. So on the database page, when we get into it, go to the performance page. There is a group of tabs. Once we're into it, we're going to go to the performance page tab. And there's sub-tabs in here. Pull down the performance page. So back to the browser, we have our group of tabs up here. This is the main page telling us the database has been up for a day. I don't remember shutting it down, but oh well. Some other information about the resources and the performance, but we're going to the performance tab, going to the performance home. Okay, now we need to log into the database. So we're going to need to log in with the database. Sysman is a database account, okay. Dev is an account we put into the database itself. So we're going to log in with Dev. Note that they have it as uppercase for this, and they note the password is uppercase. Normally for the username it shouldn't matter, but the password it would make a difference. So let's see if we've got that account. And I'm just checking what privileges. I don't believe we gave them any special privileges, and we're going to log in. It goes and chews its fingernails. We'll skip over that for now. And it gives me information about the database. So we've got into the database now. So the next thing we want to do is, once we're in the database and are logged in, what we want to do is, under the Performance tab, find the top consumer links and go and click on that link. And it's down under the additional monitoring, so it's down below the lower part of the page. Okay, so we want to go find that link. So scroll down a bit, and we'll find the additional monitoring link. Click on the top consumers, and then we want you to click on the top services. Takes it a moment to bring it up. Okay, and right now, because based on the load on the system, there is no activity, and what we're going to do is fix that in a moment. Okay, sometimes some of the background ones show up. This case, nothing showed up. So we'll look for the active services, see if that makes a difference, and it was displaying those. Sometimes giving it a moment and refreshing it, we'll put the background. Sure enough, they showed up. It was actually there before I refreshed it, but I'd already been clicking the button, was in the process of clicking it before I noticed it. Okay, and that completes the setup on Enterprise Manager.